Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry. It's time again for another adventurer spotlight. Thanks for all of the input last episode on which adventurers you'd like to see featured in the future. This time around, since Botan is a returning welfare unit available to everyone for free, I thought I'd give her some extra shine. Despite being a free unit, she's extremely powerful. Make sure to befriend her during the New Year's Tidings Raid Revival, since now's your chance if you missed her during the original event. The raid event itself goes into Botan's backstory, so I won't spend much time on that in this video. All I want to say is that I appreciate the localization for Botan a ton. You can really sense the difference in her social background when you compare her mannerisms and speech to that of Ieyasu, Suzanka, and Addis. I also love that Botan's title is Naginata Cutie, and that her description captures her singular goal so well. When it comes to gameplay, of course, there's even more to love. Let's overview the basics first. Botan's a natural 4-star Shadow Lancer. Her max HP is 785, and her max strength is 439. That puts her HP 5th highest among all Shadow Adventurers, but her strength stat ranks dead last, befitting her defense typing. If any adventurer can illustrate why raw stats aren't as important as actual kits though, Botan's the one. Ultimately, the typings like defense, support, healing, and attack just reflect stat distributions and are less important than skills and abilities. In the popular Dragalia Lost DPS simulator run by GitHub user BlueBlues, Botan's DPS is actually ranked 3rd in the game for longer fights, surpassed only by the original Elisan in 1st place and Addis in 2nd. As a Lance unit, Botan has the HP Co ability. Hers starts at 7% and can be upgraded to 15%. Depending on the entry barriers for High Jupiter's Trial, and the amount of unavoidable attacks, this could be worth upgrading. For now, that's all speculative though, so even those who promote Botan to 5-star should probably leave her co-ability untouched. That said, HP is a solid co-ability, and Lance is a solid weapon type. It's very balanced and beginner-friendly since the simplest 5-part combo is the preferred one, with either a Force Strike added to the end of the combo, or a failed Force Strike to save a few frames. A failed Force Strike just means starting to charge a Force Strike, then releasing it before it's actually ready to use. Botan's skills, in particular her first skill, are the main source of her power. Petal Piercer inflicts bleeding on a relatively short cooldown with 80% base chance. Unlike the in-game description, the wiki details show percentages. These are directly multiplied by other contributors to damage like strength, skill damage abilities, and so on, so a higher percentage translates directly into higher damage. One of the things you notice from this is that bleed damage isn't fixed. It's also represented here by a percentage. This is the reason why bleed can be further boosted by skill damage abilities. Poison, burn, and paralysis all work the same way, but bleed lasts longer, it's not an affliction, and the base percentage values are much, much higher. Bleed also scales by 50% in damage for every instance on the target, up to the cap of 3, and since bleed is technically a debuff and not an affliction, the chance of causing bleed by Botan is always set at 80%. This skill, in a nutshell, is the source of Botan's raw power. Her second skill, Perennial Grace, is much more mundane. It buffs team strength by 15% for 15 seconds, but the SP cost is more than 3 times that of Petal Piercer. For this reason, while good, this team-wide buff isn't as powerful and utterly degenerate as those seen on Elisan or Melody. Botan will take around 4 combos with Force Strikes to charge up Perennial Grace fully. For comparison, Petal Piercer only takes a combo and a half to fully charge, making it easy to stack bleed 3 times with just Botan alone. If the enemy is already capped at 3 stacks, Botan's DPS will take a severe hit, however. This anti-synergy with other bleed adventurers is a topic we'll revisit when it comes to competition for Botan. Next, let's cover her abilities before moving on to build ideas. Her first ability, Thaumian's Bane, marks Botan as a welfare unit, since several other raid units also have passives like this. This ability is narrow but potent when the enemy is of the applicable race. Slimes, golems, and sentinels are all Thaumian, so this ability is excellent for things like the Void Golem speed clears. Inexplicably, Shishimai is also a Thaumian rather than a dragon in the raid, so Botan is also especially good against him in New Year's Tidings. Botan's second ability is Paralysis Res, which only goes up to 50%. The lack of 100% Paralysis Res is a puzzle with many potential solutions, although, of course, it would be better if Botan just had 100% built in. The main context where this might pose an issue is against High Jupiter once that's released, but we don't know how punishing paralysis will be in that trial, nor the extent to which it can be evaded. If needed, several Wyrmprits could patch Botan's resistance up. Happy New Year, Castaway's Journal, and After an Eternity could all let Botan reach 100% paralysis res at the cost of one Wyrmprint slot. These prints are all very defensive, with their other abilities being Light's Res or Shadow Affliction Guard. Alternatively, Luck of the Draw and Revolutionary Magic paired together could give Botan 50% more paralysis res total, since they each provide 25% paralysis res separately. These come with buff time of 25% and full HP equals skill damage of 35% respectively, which may or may not be good against High Jupiter. It all comes down to the specific mechanics of that trial, so I wouldn't rush to invest in these prints just yet. Botan's final ability, unlockable once she's promoted to a 5-star, is skill prep of 50%. In most modes, this will just mean slightly faster initial skill use, since Botan's kit doesn't really have anything to exploit at the start of a match. However, this is very good in the Mercurial Gauntlet specifically. If paired with a 50% skill prep Wyrmprint, the best of which would be Gentle Winds, since it also grants 13% strength at full HP, then Botan can buff the team and inflict bleeding immediately to begin the gauntlet. Future Void weapons might also be able to help with this trick, and even without a Wyrmprint, 50% prep is still pretty reasonable for MG. We've dabbled into Wyrmprints already, but now let's formally move on to build ideas for Botan. In the meantime, I'll show off some gameplay with Botan, including Mercurial Gauntlet and the Shishimai raid. First up, let's talk weapons. Mistletoe is the core 5-star Shadow Lance, and it adds another attack skill to Botan's repertoire. Both the skill and the raw stats on this weapon make it the best possible option for Botan, but it's also the costliest to craft. Hellish Lance is a cheaper alternative as a 4-star. The personal critical rate buff can be extended in duration if you happen to be running Luck of the Draw, but that combo is more cute than it is practical. For endgame content, the 5-star is going to be better. Next, let's cover dragons. Thanks to Bleed, Botan's best choice is Shinobi. I calculate that before prints, roughly 61 to 68% of Botan's total damage comes from skills, and the rest comes from normal attacks. The low end of that range is a conservative estimate with only one bleed stack, while the high end is with all 3. This range should be sufficient for Shinobi to outperform Marishi-ten with most common Wyrmprint setups like Resounding Rendition plus Bonds Between Worlds. Of course, Marishi-ten is still great in second place, and is followed by the conditional Nyarlathotep and the budget 4-star Juggernaut. Now, onto Wyrmprints. I spoke of how I would build Botan for Mercurial Gauntlet earlier by using the Gentle Winds Wyrmprint. That would pair best with Resounding Rendition, since Botan values extra skill damage even if she's already running Shinobi. Builds for High Jupiter require slightly more speculation. One of the big unknowns is how punishing High Jupiter's opening blast will be, if it even has one. The second unknown is, as mentioned earlier, how powerful and pervasive paralysis will be in that fight. The worst case scenario for Botan would be that she has to max her co-ability and run both the HJP resistance print and a print like Happy New Year just to even survive and avoid paralysis. At this point, without any DPS-focused prints, she'd likely be surpassed by Sazanka in terms of damage output, and since you don't want too many bleed units, well, this could spell the end of Botan's place on the team. A slightly better scenario would be if Happy New Year's Light Res is sufficient to survive HJP's initial blast, perhaps when paired with Cleo's defense buff to start the match, similar to how Lowen uses his. If this does work, then Botan can at least run Resounding Rendition as her second print, which means she'll remain a good contender for that trial, but the popularity of Heinwald over Cleo might be a slight issue, depending on how it all shakes out. These are just two examples, but of course, there's also the chance that, similar to High Mercury's trial, neither the opening blast nor the affliction matters much at all. Finally, let's talk teammates and competition for Botan, since we've already alluded to this a few times. As just mentioned, Cleo could be useful when running Botan, either to help her meet an HP check, or to cleanse her paralysis if Botan is running without 100% paralysis res via Worm Prints. In turn, Botan's HP co-ability will help increase the size of Cleo's heals. Another valuable teammate is Veronica. Veronica's skill damage co-ability, high DPS, and independence from the bleed mechanic make her all around great. She doesn't synergize especially well with Botan outside of her co-ability helping out with bleed damage, but both units can perform their own game plans without stepping on each other's toes very much, so to speak. To that point, of course, we need to discuss Botan's primary competition, Ieyasu and Sazanka. In a vacuum, Botan has the highest DPS, but remember, she may need a print slot for paralysis res, so for practical purposes, Ieyasu and Sazanka may outperform her. Two might be okay, but the reason you wouldn't want to run all three together is that even a single one of these units can cap bleed with careful play. Without extra bleed damage, their DPS plummets. As a competitor, Ieyasu is, simply put, awesome. He has very high personal DPS thanks to bleed, the fantastic strength co-ability, and 100% paralysis res. His one weakness is that his primary skill, Sakura Flurry, has a relatively long animation, during which Ieyasu is vulnerable to purple enemy attacks. Of course, a secondary weakness is that bleed caps at 3 stacks, so if you already have other bleed units in the team comp, then Natalie will almost always be the superior blade. Sazanka, meanwhile, is closer in power to Botan. Both have survival co-abilities and some likely useless abilities for HJP, namely Sleeping Punisher and Thaumian's Bane, so that doesn't clearly favor one or the other. I expect we'll see many units viable for High Jupiter, including all three of Sazanka, Botan, and Ieyasu, but I just wouldn't want to run them all in the same team comp. If you find a group with Curran and Natalie, then that might be the best time to break out Botan as the sole bleed inducer in the group. But if the group you find already has several Ieyasus, then it's probably best to steer clear of it with your Botan. To be honest, I do have some reservations about Botan's short-term viability in HJP, just because I think there are so many powerful adventurers who already have 100% paralysis res, including newcomers like Yaten and Natalie. Over the long term, though, I have no doubt Botan will be fine to clear and may even be excellent, depending on the exact mechanics of that trial. Until HJP releases, at a minimum, Botan is a fantastic unit for things like Mercurial Gauntlet, even off-element, and, of course, for the ongoing Raid Revival event. Especially if you missed out on previous bleed-inducing units, Botan is worth promoting and investing in. She's one of the best examples of how an adventurer's welfare status and raw stats don't paint the full picture when it comes to total performance, and I'm definitely glad to have her as a 5-star in my own roster. Alright, and that just about wraps it up for this Adventurer Spotlight. I guess it won't be long now before we find out more about the next High Dragon, be that High Jupiter, High Zodiarch, or something else entirely. When the time comes, we should have a much clearer idea of just how viable Botan is. Of course, until then, I'd love to hear what you have to say about Botan in the comments below. Do you have any insights to add or thoughts to share? I look forward to reading what you have to say. Otherwise, everyone, thank you so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.